Kia ora, g'day, welcome back once again, here with a reaction that's fairly overdue. You'll see in the right hand side of the screen when I received this on the 2nd of November last year, and I just had a few other things on and had a whole bunch of other reactions that I was chipping away and working through. And anyway, this had come through. This was on the back end of a reaction that I did to Mr. Chris Ryan. He was on the HR podcast hosted by Mr. Hugh Keir, I think former para regiment sergeant, major, something like that. But seems like a really good guy. He's got his own podcast, the HR podcast, so go over and check that out. But he had Chris Ryan on, and my apologies, I forget the name of the other former 2-2 SAS operator that he also had on the show. So the three of them were sitting in this sort of cafe bar type looking environment doing a bit of an interview. Anyway, during that, Chris Ryan, there were parts where he spoke about the Bravo 20 patrol and his take on some of the things that happened, didn't happen, etc. And on the back end of that, I've had a number of kind supporters. This one in particular, I've just blanked out his email and name and stuff because he'd rather not have his name and details shown. But he asked me if I wouldn't mind doing a reaction to a list of screenshots that he's taken from several books. One's from Mr. Ratcliffe's book, another one's from Chris Ryan's book, and then another one from Mike Coburn, the Kiwi, who was also part of the Bravo 20 patrol. So he was a badged Kiwi SAS member who then went over, joined the British SAS, went through all the selection and everything, and then got badged there and went over, and he was part of the Bravo 20 patrol. So there's 3 different books. There's a number of different screenshots which this person has been kind enough to send through to me, and he's just asked for my take in different parts. He's put a bit of a blurb or some information which I've circled there with the red circles, and I'll read through those before reading through the screenshots. Some of the screenshots, there's sometimes several pages to read in each one, so bear with me as I try to read through that, and apologies if I fumble through or mess up too many of the pronunciation or words of things. So anyway, so if you're here for this, we're going to jump straight into here. So first one, he's got apologies for the delay, Joe. Now it's me apologizing for the delay because this was back in November last year. So apologies for taking so long to get to this. I did say I'd need a few months before I could get to this, and he was kind enough to say, yeah, no worries, just basically when I could. So it's got Bravo 20 decision to not take a vehicle. Number 1, it's got here RSM Peter Ratcliffe on McNabb and his patrol refusing to take vehicles despite advice from him and the CO of 2-2 SAS. These and other pics are from pages earlier in Ratcliffe's book compared to screenshots I sent before, so I've compiled all those screenshots together. So let's have a look. Promise of a crossing and the sergeant in charge of one of B Squadron's 8-man patrols, Bravo 20, seem to be plain silly buggers. So just for context, obviously you can see there page 249 of 435. He's sent through a number of screenshots of these different books at different times and asked for my reaction. Obviously, I don't have the full context or the lead up in regards to the pieces that I'm reading out. So bear with me as I go through. What I will mention, though, what I should have said at the start, actually, as part of the introduction, is that essentially, right or wrong, whatever's happened in there, whatever's truth, whatever's not truth in regards to what's been written in the various books and or said about Bravo 20, to me, my personal opinion, although it didn't impact me, I've still never read the book Bravo 20, and I never read it while I was coming through the army. But truth be told, I know it inspired a heck of a lot of people. It triggered a lot of the imagination of what could potentially happen or what could potentially be possible for anybody that might have a desire to want to join the Special Forces or indeed the Special Air Service. And I say that because when I was coming through on my not so much basic training, but on my infantry corps training, is probably where it was spoken more about. And then once I got into battalion, there were a number of guys that were really hooked on Bravo 20. I don't know if a number of those guys ever went on to do selection. I know some did. After having read the book, they were inspired. So that's the point I suppose I'm trying to make, and I should have maybe mentioned in the introduction to this, that regardless of whatever said about Bravo 20, that book inspired, from what I know, a heck of a lot of people to want to join the Special Air Service. Right or wrong, that's my take on it, based on people that I know and the way people were and how they were talking about the Army and the Special Air Service, at least when I was early into my military career. So there's something to be said for the SAS in and of itself, and the way that Bravo 20, like I said, inspired, you could say, it probably almost a generation, maybe more. Maybe it still inspires people to this day, who knows. But anyway, seem to be plain silly buggers. The CO had just come back from a frustrating conference with this sergeant, who would go on to write an account of his abortive mission in Iraq under the pseudonym Andy McNabb. I believed then, and I still do, that most, if not all, of Bravo 20's misfortunes resulted from McNabb's refusal to take advice before he left base. Okay. So this is the former RSM having his say with regards to the Bravo 20 patrol. Some of that advice had come from the CO, and he was mad as hell. Get over there and try to knock some sense into him, Billy, he told me as soon as he came into the office. I want them to take a vehicle, and they are refusing. They say the ground will be too flat and they will be compromised, but it will give them a means of escape if they get into difficulties. Okay. You know, all in all, so far, just reading that, it makes sense. I think one of the parts that stands out to me here as I read through this is, from memory, I think listening to Des Powell, who was part of Bravo 30. Really great guy. I had the privilege of working with him in the private security sector for Pilgrim Security Group when we were in and out of the Middle East, looking after television media. Obviously, very knowledgeable, skilled guy, seasoned operator. But I seem to recall him saying something along the lines of that him and his patrol thought it was mad for any patrol to not be taking a vehicle. So I could be wrong on that, so don't quote me on it. But for some reason, I've got that sort of, I can picture Des saying that, he thought it was silly to not be taking a vehicle. But anyway, going to be too flat and they will be compromised, but it will give them a means of escape if they get into difficulties. They proved to be prophetic words. Both the CO and I were aware that McNabb was only judging the ground by satellite pictures, which show heights but not depressions. Once you're on the ground, as I knew from experience, you can usually find depressions to hide a vehicle in. Yep, that's true. To be fair, the reliance on satellite photos was not his fault. Interesting that they would rely on satellite photos, and that I assume these guys would have had a fair bit of knowledge or information that would have come in from other means and not purely rely on the satellite images. But anyway, since the maps we had of Western Iraq were aerial charts showing very little ground detail, the most important reason for taking a Land Rover is that it provides a rapid means of escape from a contact and the chance to return to the objective at a later date. Retreating on foot with full kit on your back is never fast or easy. Yep, 100% agreed with that. And that means that in a situation where your patrol is threatened, the only way out, is to ditch most of the gear and run. Fighting a rear guard action as you go. Even if you manage to get clear, however, there is no way you can ever make another attempt to fulfill the mission because you have had to abandon your gear, as well as thoroughly alerting the enemy in that area. There is nothing for it but to call to be evacuated. It was also highly relevant to Bravo 20, or should have been, that A and D squadrons were operating in 4 half-squadron mobile fighting units within 20 to 30 miles of their North Road Watch operational area. Okay, with a vehicle at their disposal, the possible solution to a multitude of problems was pretty obvious, and only a couple of hours' drive away. But McNabb, a London lad with an engaging Cockney accent and 7 or 8 years service with the regiment, so there you go, like I was saying, he would have had a bit of experience already in those 7-8 years, was having none of it. And his face showed it when I sauntered over to where his patrol was gathered around him. I didn't bother with a preamble, simply telling him, I'm strongly advising you to take a vehicle. If it comes to a firefight, it could well save your ass. So take the boss's and my advice and don't be a fool. No way, he retorted. We don't need it and we're not taking it. It's a surefire way of getting compromised. Okay. Interesting. Hard there with the guys butting heads. You got the patrol commander, I assume Andy McNabb, the RSM coming to speak to him on behalf of the CO after the CO said go and try and talk some sense into him, basically. Surprising though, because I mean, if the CO or the RSM, tell you to do something, I would have imagined that they would have done it, albeit begrudgingly. But yeah, anyway. But at least you'll have a means of escape, I said. We've got our own guys working to your rear, and if you do get inserted successfully, then you'll know the ground has been cleared by the chopper, and you'll have plenty of time to select a decent LUP for yourselves and the vehicle. But McNabb was adamant. Indeed, I wondered if he was even hearing me. You can forget it, he said. I'm telling you what I've already told the CO. It's not for us. Interesting. I looked around at the faces of the other members of his unit and saw only defiance there as they began to chip in support of their patrol commander. Okay. It'd be like dragging a bloody great albatross around with us, said one comedian. We don't want it because there'll be nowhere to hide it, said another. One man who also supported McNabb was Chris Ryan. Okay. He had been a part-time soldier with the Territorial Army when he decided to try for selection and passed. Like McNabb, he was destined to survive the war. And like McNabb, he found success as an author under the pseudonym Chris Ryan, with an account of his adventures in the Gulf entitled The One That Got Away. That book gives the impression that he disagreed with McNabb on a number of points, while McNabb's own book also indicates that the two did not always see eye to eye. Nevertheless, Ryan joined McNabb and the others that day in vetoing any suggestion of taking a Land Rover. Sorry, it just says has their I after the end. Okay. That's, the RSM's take on his recollection of the conversation with Andy McNabb, also his recollection of his conversation with the CO prior to speaking with Andy, and then also being there where the patrol was, highly recommending that they take a vehicle, and basically being told, nah, we don't need it, it's not for them, surefire way of getting compromised, etc., etc. So, again, interesting that they didn't just pull rank, the CO and the RSM, that they didn't just pull rank and just go, no, you need to take a vehicle, if that's how strongly they felt about it, At the same time, I guess the patrol commanders in the regiment and the units are, like they said, pretty seasoned. So that Andy had already been in 7-8 years in the regiment. However much of that time, probably 2, maybe 3 years of that as a patrol commander, I'm assuming. Maybe more, maybe less. But, he's been trusted with the reins essentially as the patrol commander and the leader of that group. So maybe they didn't want to pull rank on him. 2, why weren't they? Oh, okay, yeah. So why weren't they ordered to take vehicles? Personally, so this is where we're getting into now, the next screenshot. Personally believe that after coming under fire in Iraq, and with 3 of the 8-man patrol dead and 4 captured, McNabb and the other survivors later deeply regretted not taking the advice of the boss and myself. Okay, so that sounds like this is the RSM giving their take, that they personally believe that, McNabb probably regretted not taking the advice. However, at the time, I realised that they had obviously hammered this out between themselves and were set upon a course which I, like the CO, couldn't comprehend. A lot of kit, a lot of distance. Your back is to the wall 100% should you get compromised and you're on foot. Nor was there anything I could do about it. I don't know about that. The RSM, I mean, you got a lot of weight. So nor was there anything I could do about it. We had reached an impasse and we all knew it. I could easily have ordered them to take a vehicle. There you go. So as could the CO, which I mentioned earlier, because what the colonel or the RSM says will be obeyed, reluctantly or otherwise. So yeah, that's what could have happened. So to say earlier, nor was there anything I could do about it, but then at the same time say that, could have ordered them, like it sort of cancels the previous comment out, in my opinion anyway. Where are we? Because what the colonel or the RSM says will be obeyed reluctantly or otherwise. Yep. But I also knew from my long experience in the regiment what would happen as a result. They would have gone on the ground with a vehicle, admittedly, and almost certainly got themselves compromised in some way. Ooh, that's a big call, eh? Let's go back. I also knew from my long experience in the regiment what would happen as a result. They would have gone on the ground with a vehicle, almost certainly got themselves compromised in some way. Man, it sounds like the RSM is saying that they would have gone and intentionally got themselves compromised. I don't know if they'd do that. But again, the RSM has said in his experience, what does he say? From my long experience in the regiment, what would happen as a result? Far out. I mean, there's some issues there if that's been this RSM's experience or long experience coming across or encountering things like that, where operators would go out and intentionally get themselves compromised on a job. Why? To try to say I told you so or something? Doesn't make sense to me. I don't know that would happen, but hey, I wasn't there, eh? And that's another thing I should have said at the start in this introduction. Like, caveat this, as well as the inspiring a generation, I suppose, for want of a better term, which Bravo 20 no doubt did. I wasn't there, so I'm reading bits and pieces and screenshots and reading things completely out of context, like it's not flowing from one thing to the next, and it's a reaction that somebody has expressed an interest in, wanting to get my 2 cents for what it's worth. So anyway, let's carry on. Compromise in some way. They would then have come back and said, "Up yours! If you hadn't made us take the vehicle, we wouldn't have failed. It's all your fault." Geez, yeah. I don't know about that, eh? But I guess this RSM knows these guys much better than I do. But man, that just seems crazy to me, to go out and look to get compromised just to come back and say, "See, bloody up yours, it's all your fault." Anyway, that may appear incredibly childish. Yeah, that's what I was thinking, if I didn't spit those words out. But it's what could happen. So I think that part there, as I read this, based on the RSM's thoughts or perspectives, is making an assumption of what could happen based on, he clearly says there of what could, but it's what could happen. So we don't know that it would have happened, but he wasn't prepared. Sounds like him and or the CO weren't prepared to risk ordering McNabb and his patrol to take a vehicle because they thought that something like what's just been described could happen. I don't know, that seems pretty flimsy, I suppose, is the thought that comes to mind when I'm reading that. And it doesn't show a strong level of leadership in that sense. Now, taking nothing away from the RSM or the CO, to be the leaders of the Special Air Service Regiment, you have to be an incredibly competent and capable leader. So I'm not saying that they're not. Just in this aspect of what I'm reading, though, that doesn't seem basing something that could happen, biting the bullet. And if you think that that's going to happen, but you feel strongly that there's a higher chance of success and getting the men in and out as safely as they can, and I suppose you're trusting these men, and if you're feeling like you can't trust them because you think that they would go out and intentionally get compromised, there's probably bigger issues or other issues at play which need to be addressed more than a debate about whether or not you take a vehicle. Anyway, these tough as nails, highly trained soldiers who would go to hell and back if their CO asked them to, could also act very stubbornly. Okay, I suppose I can relate to that, being stubborn. If they felt that they had been slighted in any way or that their professionalism had been questioned, however lightly. Yeah, I think there's truth to that, eh? I think there's probably truths to all of these guys' books and what they've written. One of them has probably got more truth in it than the others, I would imagine. And again, this is, as I'm reading this, and sorry for taking so long, there's just a lot going through my head as I read this. I'm probably overthinking stuff, but at the same time, I'm just thinking, man, these guys have earned their place into the unit. They're now trusted. They've got several years under their belt. But you are still the leaders of the regiment, and what you say goes at the end of the day, reluctantly or not, as you've mentioned. And I suppose if you feel that strongly about it from a leadership perspective, then just backing that decision, backing yourself. I think that still is something that needs to happen today, and I'd like to think that it does happen today, not just in the regiment, but wherever you may be. So, but it obviously easier said than done as well, which I get. Anyway, back to here. Objectivity would fly out the window to be replaced by a macho pride. It is in order to avoid such self-defeating, even damaging displays, therefore, that the SAS has, for many years, had a rule that the man in command on the ground is always right, whatever his rank. Oh, interesting. The man in command on the ground is always right, whatever his rank. So I suppose as I read that, sounds like he's using that to say that it supersedes what the CO or the RSM may want. And yeah, but again, coming back to the leadership, yeah, everybody's a leader, especially in the unit. You need to be able to step up and lead and make decisions. But yeah, that, I don't know, it just seems a bit, the man in command on the ground is always right. That's like saying the customer's always right, when we know, just inherently we know the customer's not always right. Like I could be a prick of a customer and I'm demanding or asking for something or some type of service which isn't part of the package. And because I'm the customer, to say that I'm always right, in my opinion, is BS. Like the customer's not always right. So the man in command on the ground is always right. I sort of, as I read that, I've not heard that before. The man in command on the ground is always right. Maybe certain situations or scenarios, but technically at this stage, Andy and his team aren't out on the ground. Like they're back at a base camp, I'm presuming, where these conversations are taking place, doing some in-country pre-deployment training type stuff, getting briefings, etc. So they're not physically out on the ground. Once you're out on the ground, then, you know, the people that are on the ground in the fight, when the crap hits the fan, yeah, they're right because they're there and amongst it. So HQ, you know, all hands on deck, try to mobilize whatever they can support-wise to support the people on the ground because they are in the thick of it. But before being out on the ground, always right. Yeah, I don't know about that. Whatever his rank, in the end, you do not question his decisions before he goes into the field because it is his patrol. Yeah, I don't agree with that either. I think, you know, I like to think that leaders, you know, whether it's a platoon sergeant or a platoon commander or a squadron sergeant major or an OC or your RSM or your CO, like if they've got concerns or queries, that's what those places are famous for, like asking questions, even the team members in the patrol, because it's not just the patrol commander's life on the line, it's everybody in the team's life on the line. So if something doesn't sit right, or if something's not making sense, or the action's on, or there's a part of the orders that doesn't make sense, or the mission doesn't make sense, then I would expect or assume that people would ask questions to get clarity around it. So because it's his patrol and he has got to live with it. Well, yes and no. I mean, well, not yes and no. Yes, that's true, but so do the other leaders. So in this case, the RSM and CO, you know, you've got to live with it too. And the other leaders that are part of that chain, however their squadron system is made up, you've got to live with it and with the consequences. Well, yeah, everybody's got to live with it, eh? And I think even more than that, not just those leaders, like the regiment has then got to live with it, because then you get the peanut gallery, which you could say I'm part of the peanut gallery right now with my reaction to this and what I'm reading, sits back and goes, oh man, those guys are idiots, or this person said this, and no, this person here said that. And, you know, it can leave a negative taste or paint a negative picture of the regiment for a number of people that just don't know. Like for me, yeah, there might be, and I haven't even got into whatever's in the other books yet or the other screenshots yet, but I might disagree with a bunch of stuff and all the things that we're going to have a look at. Who knows? But nobody's going to convince me that the regiment, the British, New Zealand or Australian Special Forces, the SAS in particular, nobody's going to convince me that they're terrible units, or that they're full of bad people and that they're corrupt and all that sort of stuff. Don't get me wrong, there's some bad eggs and everything, which I've said in multiple other videos throughout last year, and they are not perfect, far from it. They're filled with people at the end of the day, and us as people, we're imperfect, make silly mistakes, can be too stubborn at times, but they are also, based on my experience, also highly capable and willing to do, willing to risk it all for the success of the mission and for each other. So there's my take, there's far more good in the regiment, in the Special Air Service, regardless of which country you're talking about. And in this case here, as I'm reacting to the stuff here about 2-2, there's far more good within those units than there would ever be bad. And, people, I don't care who they are, they're more than likely not going to convince me otherwise. Not unless there's somebody that I know that's, served in 2-2 and what they've seen has been completely different. Like if they've seen far more bad than good during their time there, but I doubt that. So anyway, living with the consequences, yeah. I guess everybody's still living with the consequences even to this day. 3, bloody hell, there's heaps in this, and I'm not even, what are we, nearly half an hour. Anyway, I'm just going to keep going. Number 3A, Coburn's portrayal of not taking vehicles differs to ex-RSM Ratcliffe's. Okay, so this, yeah, from page 25 of Soldier 5 book, Forward Operations Base. Let's have a look. Forward Operations Base. Don't worry about it, Kiwi. I've got no intention of having to go anywhere near Syria. If we are in the shit, a quick blast on the TAC B and the boys will come roaring in to get us. What could be simpler? Andy then turned to Vince. I know there aren't any 110s, so that's the 110s, I believe, are the Rovers, the normal size Rovers, but I'm sure there are some dinkies, short wheelbase Land Rover floating about. There are, Vince replied. 3 of them. Problem is that one of the other patrols has nabbed 2 already, and I doubt we can fit 8 blokes plus kit into a 3/4 size Land Rover. It's going to be a tight fit with just one. Crazy that you've got 3 patrols, I assume, because of the Bravo 330 patrol, which Des Powell was a part of, and he's put out a book in that around Bravo 30, and that you've only got, like, you don't have enough vehicles for I assume your 3 8-man patrols to have 4 in each vehicle. It just seems nuts. But anyway, where would we hide the bloody thing anyway? Said Geordie. This is an OP task, not a recce. The debate continued in this vein for a couple of hours or more as various plans, options and contingencies were thrashed out amongst the patrol, a process known informally as in the regiment as the Chinese Parliament. Once the debate was concluded, everyone had a general idea of their tasks and how the patrol would be conducted. The detail of the plan would be left for Andy to cover in his orders. Okay. So it sounds very different based on the earlier comment from what the RSM said when he went over to the group and had a chat. So anyway, okay. Ryan saying not taking a vehicle was a critical mistake. Chris Ryan, the one that got away. There he is. But I had never operated in the desert and just couldn't see a small patrol like ours escaping detection if we were saddled with vehicles. Looking back, I realised it was a cardinal mistake to go without. Okay, so, the benefit of hindsight, eh? Like with a lot of things, myself included. Benefit of hindsight, the vision's always 20/20, eh? You can see much clearer because you've been there, done it. You're here where you are now, looking back and going, oh, far out. It would have been way better if we had done it. Or in this case, I realise, as Chris is saying, it was a cardinal mistake to go without. I assume he's talking about the vehicles. What we should have done was to drive in, install an OP with a couple of men, change them over every night, and pull off to a safe distance during the days, hiding the vehicles under cam nets in the bottom of some deep wadi. Mobility apart, the advantage of vehicles would have been that we could fit them up with powerful armaments, including heavy machine guns. Yep. Could have carried a heck of a lot more gear, a heck of a lot more ammo, fuel, water, food if they needed, that sort of thing. Yeah, for sure. Oh, Yeah, okay. So that third part was just like the screenshot said, Chris Ryan, in hindsight, saying that they should have taken vehicles. But hey, what's done is done. Part 4, Bravo 20 refusal to reduce kit. I'm not sure which this part is for. I'm assuming this might still be for Mr. Ratcliffe's part of the book. So having lost that discussion, I then tried to get Bravo 20 at least to reduce the amount of kit they were taking. Everything was spread or piled around them. Yes, I guess this is back to the RSM's book. It was piled around them. Weapons, ammunition, Bergens, rations, water containers, sandbags, communications equipment lay everywhere. Yeah. What's all this, Andy? I asked. Deadpan, he replied, it's the kit we think is essential to the mission. From the look on his face, I could tell that he wasn't going to take any advice about reducing the amount they would have to carry. Still, I had to try, so I asked how long they were going for. I admit to being the traditional kind of practical soldier who believes that you don't need much equipment to operate efficiently and that you should go in as light as possible, but they were taking 20 or 30 bulging sandbags in addition to the rest of their gear. Tell me it's bulging 20 or 30 sandbags amongst the 8 of them. Why is that? Unless they're building a bunker or something? Anyway, tell me, Andy, what's with the sandbags, I asked. They're full of kit. We've got water. Okay. Yeah. We've got water, ammunition, batteries, rations. They're going to be cached. Their Bergens were already stuffed almost to bursting point, as were their belt kits, with rations, water, radios and spare batteries, ammunition, personal equipment, sleeping bags, waterproofs, medical packs, survival kits, and much more. On top of all that, of course, they had their weapons as well as grenades, and for each man, a single-shot Law 66 anti-tank rocket launcher weighing nearly 10 pounds? Was that like the M72, I'm guessing? 66 rocket M72? Weighing nearly 10 pounds. I knew to a certainty that they were taking far too much. I couldn't accurately guess the weight load for each man, but when they pulled out the next night, McNabb estimated that each of Bravo 20's men was carrying 150 pounds. 150 pounds, what's that? 150 pounds. 55 pounds is about 25 kilos. Is that right? 55 pounds? 55. So you got 25, 50, 75, 80 to 90 kgs worth of weight, something like that. That's the same as hefting a 10.5 stone man around with you. Yeah, I don't know what that is in kgs, but I'm guessing roughly anywhere between 80 to 90 kgs, which, you're like piggybacking another person around. That's a heck of a lot of weight. I gave them a dozen paces maximum, yet McNabb expected them to move freely as circumstances demanded. An SAS unit, to misquote Muhammad Ali, should be capable of floating like a butterfly and stinging like a swarm of killer bees. The guys in McNabb's patrol were carrying far too much equipment and far too much weight to be able to operate effectively. They were not going to reduce their load. However, either on my say so or the commanding officers. They were not going to reduce their load, however, either on my say so or the commanding officers. Okay, so he's saying that they wouldn't reduce their load regardless of what he said or the CO. And from that perspective, in terms of kit and equipment, hard to argue with a patrol commander and the team if they feel that that's the equipment that they need. But in terms of the order for a vehicle and not giving it based on what could have happened or what he thought could happen in terms of the guys being stubborn and just getting compromised on purpose, I don't know of any SAS patrol that would want to go out, especially if you're part of like the other 3 Bravo or the other 2 Bravo patrols, that would want to go out and be the one that comes back and says we got compromised. I don't know. Anyway, so I returned to the CO's office in about the same foul mood as he had been in when he sent me to talk to Bravo 20, and for much the same reasons. He won't take a vehicle, and that's the end of it, I reported back. He gave me the same cockeyed justification he gave you, and he won't cut back on kit either. Short of ordering him to do it, I don't think anything either of us says now is going to change his mind. I paused before adding, and in my opinion, it's best not to force him. Okay, so I mean, credit to this RSM for, like, sounds like to me, being very honest in and around. He didn't order him. He's explained why he didn't, but he acknowledges that he could have, and the CO could have as well. So can't put it all on the RSM's shoulders, eh? Like the CO, you're the person in charge of that unit as the commanding officer. So you give anybody an order in the regiment, then that's what they need to do. It's best not to force them. The boss nodded. I agree, Billy, but thank you for trying. Okay, so the CO and the RSM agree, and they both chose to not, give the order to make Andy McNabb and his team take a vehicle. I left the CO's office hoping that my conclusions about Bravo 20 were wrong, because given the way the patrol was being mounted, I didn't think it was going to work. Yep, lots in there, eh? With regards to what I've tried to read out so far. Apologies if it's a bit staticky and jerky with regards to my reading. I don't claim to be any great reader. Anyway, number 5. Ex-RSM Peter Ratcliffe saying failures of the patrol was due to ignoring advice from him and the CO of 22 SAS. And he was surprised McNabb failed to mention the ignored advice from him/the CO. What's the ex-RSM failures? Okay, he was surprised McNabb failed to mention. Okay, maybe he's talking about McNabb's Bravo 20 book. Let's go. Having heard the official debriefing of the survivors of Bravo 20 back in Hereford after the war had ended, I was surprised by several of McNabb's anecdotes as he recounted them in his book. What I found most surprising, however, was that in the book he made no mention at all of the 2 meetings he and his men had with the Colonel and myself. Meetings during which we tried our damnedest to persuade him to take a vehicle and to cut down on the amount of kits they would be carrying. His sole reference says that I came over to them, wished them luck, told them to get the job done and to come back safely. Well, I don't know. I've not read the book. But if that's all that's been put in there from a patrol commander who's had interactions, from what the RSM is saying in his book, who's had interactions with the CO and the RSM, and that's all he's put in there, and nothing about being told to take a vehicle and that he pushed back hard, from what I gather from what the RSM is saying. Yeah, well, I could understand why he wouldn't put that in, because it would make him probably look and sound not that great. That's the only thing I can put it down to, if that's what happened. Considering what were, I'm convinced, the results of not following our advice, I find it odd that he didn't feel the meetings worth mentioning. After all, the failure of that mission ultimately cost the lives of 3 men and led to 4 others being captured and tortured. That's a casualty rate of nearly 90%. Yeah. Pretty... yeah, that hits, like I was all smiles until I come to this part. The loss of 3 men's lives, and then 4 others being captured, and Chris Ryan being the one that got away from the 8-man patrol. So, yeah, not good. Anyway, part 6. One other patrol decided against the vehicle. Oh, okay, so one other patrol decided against the vehicle. Let's have a look at this. First, though, we had to get our 3 B Squadron units away. Bravo 20 and 2 other 8-man patrols. Bravo 30, which is the one Des Powell I spoke about. I think I've got his book somewhere. It'd be tucked away down the bottom there. I've read the vast majority of that, not all of it, but I've enjoyed what I've read so far. Bravo 30, which, like Bravo 20, declined to take a vehicle, and Bravo 19, which did take a Land Rover. So hang on. Bravo 30, which, like Bravo, declined to take a vehicle. I thought they took a vehicle. So maybe they declined initially, but then maybe they decided that they were going to take a vehicle, because the book that I've read and what Des speaks about, they did have a vehicle, or they had 2 vehicles. So, yeah, maybe they initially declined it and then said, okay, yeah, no, we'll take a vehicle. Mike Coburn's book, number 7. The book the British government tried to ban, Soldier 5, The Real Truth About the Bravo 20 Mission. Okay. And it's tough, eh? Like, you've got the RSM, Ratcliffe, with his book. Eye of the Storm, I think that book is called. Apologies if I've got that wrong. but I think that's what it is. He wasn't out on the ground, but he was in country. He was in theatre at the time, lead up to. He was involved in, obviously, sounds like several meetings and conversations with the patrol commander and team members. So he's giving his take around the vehicle situation and what didn't happen. And then or his take of what did and didn't happen. Then you've got him referencing Andy McNabb's book from Bravo 20, and then there's some information which we've read. In hindsight, Chris Ryan's view, it was a cardinal mistake to not take vehicles. So, yeah, seems like there's no getting around it. They didn't take a vehicle, and the decision is the decision. Now we've got Mike Coburn. I've had the good fortune and privilege to meet this guy. I've got a photo with him in the photo. I won't show that photo because it's got a whole bunch of other current serving and former Kiwi SAS operators, including Big Phil Hookyounger, or Hokie, I think was his nickname in the unit. I had the privilege to interview him a few years ago when I was still doing the Epic Aotearoa podcast, and then he was kind enough to invite me to a barbecue at his place of business where he had a few other guys in that there. So it was nice to see some of them. Vast majority, I would say, didn't know who I was. And there was a few faces there who were my instructors during my cycle, and they no doubt didn't know who I was or didn't remember me, but I remembered them. But yeah, it was nice to spend some time there. So, and it was cool to meet this guy, even though I didn't get a chance to really get to know him or have an in-depth conversation or look to try to invite him onto the podcast. Who knows? Maybe at some point in the future, I might have the opportunity, or he might be willing to have a chat one day. But anyway, Soldier 5, Mike Coburn. All right, what's this? Number 8, wiki description. So I have screenshotted these, and then I've just circled stuff where I can, but then I just put them in the order of how they came in the email. So I haven't read through these things. I just sort of circled it and then just tried to put them in the order as they show up. Wiki description. It is published under the pseudonym Mike Coburn, but the author is the member referred to as Mark the Kiwi in other accounts. It is more critical of the command structure than other accounts had been, and the book was only published after a lengthy and expensive series of court battles, probably hence why they say the book that they tried to ban. And by court order, the resulting royalties go to the UK Ministry of Defence. What? By court order, the resulting royalties go to the UK Ministry of Defence. Why is that? The New Zealand Court of Appeal upheld the confidentiality contract signed by Coburn as a member of the UK Special Forces, ruling that there was valid consideration that it was not an unconscionable bargain and that it was not the result of duress or undue influence. I don't get that. I don't. Yeah, well, I'm not a lawyer, eh? Okay, so hang on. It is okay, so I've read all of that down to undue influence. However, the court declined to order an injunction against its publication, noting that Coburn had not waived his right to freedom of expression and that the matters contained in the book were now in the public domain. So if he's got that right to freedom of expression and the matters contained in the book were now in the public domain, why are the resulting royalties to go to the UK Ministry of Defence? I don't know. Any lawyers out there that know and that can explain it, feel free to educate me on it. I don't get that. That seems like crap. He should be getting the royalties. I assume Andy McNabb gets the royalties from any sales of his book, Bravo 20. Likewise, I assume Chris Ryan gets any royalties from his book. They go to him. Why doesn't, if I'm reading this properly, maybe I'm not reading it properly, why doesn't Mike get the royalties that he should get for his book? That seems pretty piss poor, to be honest, from my take anyway. Foreword by Mal, another Bravo 20 member of Australian origin. Oh wow! I wonder if he was badged Australian essays before going over there, or unless he's just born and raised in Australia and moved to the UK. Let's see. Forward. Yep. This is not only Mike's story, it's mine. I could not have related the events more truthfully and objectively myself. Mike captures the feelings of frustration, betrayal, and self-doubt we experience in the ill-fated mission codenamed Bravo 20. Although we had been given up for dead, we made it home against all odds, not unscathed, but able to tell the story. And it was a story that needed recounting, to one another, to the regiment, and not least of all, to the families of those who had died. Many of us were shocked when the details of this operation escaped from the confines of the proper regimental forum and split into the public domain. However, over 10 years on, the issues surrounding the demise of the patrol have yet to be put to rest. Yeah, wow. Yeah, look, here I am still doing a reaction to it, however many blinking years later, more than 20 years later. For those of us who have until recently remained serving with the SAS and therefore bound by its code of silence, this has been frustrating to say the least. I bet. Now I can endorse this credible account of the events as they happened. While it is hard-hitting and uncompromising, there is an intelligent analysis of events as they developed. Mike has not shied away from relating some of the more unpalatable incidents, neither has he painted the men involved with qualities greater than they possessed. I like it. To have done otherwise would have gone against everything the Specialist Service stands for. In this, he has upheld the ideals of David Stirling, in particular those of professional integrity and humility. Mike is an SAS man who stands tall and is not afraid of the truth, and his gripping account is an impressive reflection of the man himself. Above all, it is a fitting tribute to the only real heroes of Bravo 20, our comrades who did not beat the clock, our friends we shall never forget, Bob, Vince, and Legs. Mal. What a cool foreword for Mike Coburn's book. What better endorsement to have for your book than one of your teammates that was there? Wow. Respect, Mel. Thanks for your comments in there and the foreword to Mike's book. Bravo 20 pick from Wiki. Oh yeah, the same one on the book. And it's got from left to right, Ryan Consiglio. I've heard that name. I think I've heard Chris Ryan talk about him. McGowan, Mal, obscured. Lane, Coburn, obscured. McNabb, obscured. Phillips, Pring, obscured. Picks, Bravo 20 post-capture. Happy campers a few hours after release from Iraq. RAF shuttle from Saudi to Cyprus. Coburn is the one with tattoos on his arms. Okay. Not rice again. First wholesome meal in weeks. Part 10. A. Coburn's account of CO and 22SAS admitting mistakes that led to Bravo 20 difficulties and his criticism of 22SAS leadership. He is also critical of McNabb in initially keeping quiet when the CO spoke to them. So Chapter 19, let's have a look. Chapter 19, 22SAS Regimental Headquarters, Stirling Lines, March 1991. I sat on the edge of my seat, crutches and leg thrust out before me, and let my eyes wander about the sparsely furnished room. There was a huge polished desk that dominated the opposite end to where we were seated. The walls were adorned with nothing but the occasional plaque, painting, or piece of regimental memorabilia. I shouldn't have been nervous, but the sense of having been in this situation before in a similar office before a man of the same rank was hovering in the background. I had to force myself to remember that I was on friendly territory. Good afternoon, men. The CO strode in purposefully from an unseen doorway, adorned in his camouflage DPMs, with blue regimental stable belt, a large man over 6 feet tall, with an unruly mass of dark black hair. He moved on over to where we were seated. I began to rise with Andy, Dinger, and Mel, but he insisted I remain seated while he shook our hands. From the door through which we had entered, an assistant appeared carrying a tray with a bottle of champagne and 5 tall, thin glasses. The tray deposited, the man disappeared discreetly, closing the office door behind him. Pulling a chair over to sit in the opposite corner, the Colonel delivered his opening line, a comment that will live with me for the rest. Hang on. Hope I've got. So, outrage at CO saying they wouldn't be court-martialed. Oh, okay, maybe that's what I was going to say. Also, Bravo 20, given wrong radio frequencies and informed AWACS, was out of range given they headed for Syria and it was meant for southern regions. AWACS, what's that? Airborne something communications or something like that. Can't remember. Anyway, so hang on. A comment that will live with me for the rest of my days. Well, gentlemen, before we start, I want you all to know that you are not going to be court-martialed. No wonder that lived with him for the rest of his days. Why would they be court-martialed? The silence was deafening. The blood drained from my face, and I felt my jaw drop on hearing those words. Yeah, he's got here. What the F was he talking about? Court-martialed? That's just initially what I was thinking. Why would he be saying that? I looked at the man carefully to see if this was some kind of joke, but he simply stared back at me, showing no emotion whatsoever. I flicked a quick glance at the others, all of whom were wearing the same incredulous expression. He's got to be winding us up, I thought to myself. This guy can't even begin to imagine what we've been through. Yeah, I would have thought that he's taking the piss. That's what I would have thought as well, but it seems like he's not. He reached over to the small table and began to pour the champagne, passing the glass to each of us in turn as if what he had just said had never occurred. Strange. Everyone ready? He raised his glass, toasted to our return, and drank. The somewhat shell-shocked reminder of us followed suit. As I raised my glass, my mind flashed back to weeks before, images of the fear and the pain of being shot, of the beatings I had received, of the loneliness of the prison cell, of the feelings of desperation and doubt, of Bob, Vince, and Legs. The glass rested on my lips, but I did not drink. I want to clear the air right away, he continued. So if you have any questions about what went on, fire away. Wow. That's the CO's welcome back to these guys, eh? Well, good news is you're not going to be court-martialed. And then making a toast. Yeah, like, if this is Mike's book, he's right. I can't even imagine everything that would have been running through his mind. Being shot, being captured, being beaten, being tortured, being questioned, the loss of 3 of their mates on the patrol. Like, there's a whirlwind of stuff going on. And the lads are sitting there now with the CO having that as the first sort of conversation in a half-assed toast. I looked at Andy for a lead. Yeah, expecting him to bombard the colonel with some of the 1,000,001 questions that I had been tormenting myself with over the last 2 months, but he said nothing. That's interesting, eh? So Mike's perspective, looking to your team leader, your patrol commander, to speak up, to ask questions. But I'm guessing if the team leader didn't say anything, or if the patrol commander didn't say anything, it's probably because maybe he had a flash of things running through his mind as well. Maybe he had a flash of the conversations with the RSM and the CO, telling them to take vehicles, telling them to reduce the kit, to whatever else was said or not said. Maybe just stunned at, him being the leader or the patrol commander and not making the decisions that maybe in hindsight he wishes or maybe wished he had made. Who knows? Possibly conscious that he may be skating on thin ice and therefore shouldn't be the first to rock the boat. Yeah, maybe that as well. Dinger direct as ever, had no such reservations. Sir, what happened with our comms? You were given the wrong frequencies, he replied bluntly. Okay, so this is the CO. Answering the question, you were given the wrong comms, wrong frequencies. And yet, in the same breath earlier, you're saying they're not going to be court-martialed. You'll be, before we start, I want you all to know you're not going to be court-martialed. How about you court-martial the people that gave the wrong frequencies? They couldn't work that far north. I'm investigating how that was allowed to happen. As for your SATCOM, we have no answer for that one. What about the TAC-Bs? Mao immediately responded. Why didn't the AWACS ever answer our calls for help? You were 300 kilometers out of range. AWACS only operated in the southern regions, Saudi, Kuwait. I don't know who told you that there would be coverage that far up, but it was wrong. You weren't supposed to be heading for Syria anyway. Wow, this is just the start of it, eh? Part C, Bravo 20 given wrong E&E plan by OC of their squadron, I assume. In brackets, okay, so this is the person who sent me through this to do the reaction. given the wrong E&E plan. XRSM Ratcliffe's account doesn't say this. CO effectively saying Bravo 20 was expendable, so didn't commit resources to rescue. What? Hang on, is this the Andy finally? Yeah, okay. Soldier 5, Andy finally woke up. But that was the plan, sir. The whole patrol was there when the OC told us Syria would be the E&E destination. I'm aware of that, and it has been addressed. The temperature in the room was beginning to rise. The patrol's E&E plan had, contrary to what we had been told, actually taken us away from our vital support element. This admission showed an incredible breakdown in communication between the command elements of the regiment, and one that was certainly too late to address now. What happened to the lost comms procedure? Dinger questioned again. Why wasn't a new set brought into us? With those S-60s around, I was not going to send any aircraft to your location till we had confirmation of exactly what was going on. He continued, I had few airframes available to me and 4 half squadron groups to support. I couldn't risk them until the situation was clarified. Not satisfied with that answer, I carried on. Wow. In that case, why didn't you send a chopper with the QRF when you received our compromise message, or our ERV was miles away from those S-60s? His reply was direct and to the point, needing neither further elaboration nor comment. Listen, at that stage of the war, Scuds were being launched at Israel practically on a nightly basis. I would have sacrificed a squadron of men for a Scud. Stopping them was the priority. End of story. Wow. The CEO's brave, man. But yeah, like Mike said, 6 foot, regardless. I mean, that's not that tall or that big. Based on just what I'm reading here and trying to imagine the tension in that room, and we've already heard temperatures were already starting to rise, I'm surprised that there wasn't any punches thrown and that there wasn't a scrap. You know, that would have resulted in a court-martial. But listening to that's got to make your blood boil. Yeah, wow. I would have sacrificed a squadron of men for a Scud. Stopping them was the priority. End of story. A momentary silence once again ensued as the enormity of that statement sunk in. The enormity of that statement, for sure. If the SAS hierarchy were prepared to sacrifice scores of men for the sake of a Scud, then our call for help was insignificant in the scheme of things, and that immediately cast the patrol in an entirely different light. Holy heck, man. That's crazy. For a CEO, for any leader to say something like that to their men. Wow. Anyway, my questions were now over. I had the answer I needed, and the uncertainty would burn no more. The fault was not our own, nor had it ever been. Our fate had been sealed by those in charge, from the comfort of a secure location. Ill-equipped and poorly briefed, we had always been sent out there on our own. It was just that no one had thought it necessary to tell us. Expendable might be an unpalatable description, particularly amongst elite soldiers, but I now had no doubt in my mind that in our case it was an accurate one. Man, I wonder if I'm assuming Mike must have already been out of the unit. He would have been out by the time he did this book, but I wonder how long after hearing that and having this debrief and this conversation and then having these thoughts instantly, which, you know, I wouldn't fault anybody. I'd probably had the same thoughts too if I was sitting in the room and that's what I heard. I wonder how long after this briefing before he decided to leave the regiment. D. Coburn saying given air superiority not justified to send help, and how he lost trust in SA's leadership from then on. Crazy. I'm not surprised. Where are we? This was war. Okay, so here we are. This was war, and hard decisions needed to be made. The CO continued, it may seem difficult to justify now, but at the time, that was the reality of the situation. Far out. But it was difficult to justify. particularly given the coalition's celebrated total air superiority and the Americans' 24-hour CSAR capability. Under these conditions, even the excuse of no available airframes sounded unconvincing. More importantly, however, the reality of the situation was that these decisions, the lack of action or support when the patrol was in need, eventually contributed to the death of 3 men and the capture and torture of 4 others. Yeah, I mean, coalition, man, the Americans would have massively had air superiority. So the concern from the from the CEO around what he was mentioning earlier, yeah, why didn't you could have sent a chopper with QRF on there? What's the point of having the QRF with chopper access, giving them the briefing, you'd be ready to go if something happens, and then not using them? That's nuts to me. As the magnitude of the commanding officer's remarks sank in, I realised that I would no longer see the regiment in the same light. The pedestal upon which I had placed it had been kicked from under it. Yep, not surprised if that's what he's been hearing. It wasn't the fighting men that were the problem. They were outstanding. Yep, no, I agree with that too. Like, the guys there are fantastic. Not that I know the guys in Tutu. I only know a handful of people that have been there and that have served there. You couldn't ask for more dedicated or committed soldiers. They had to be to get where they were. It was my faith in the system that had been shattered, a system with an unwritten code that says you can expect to be backed up when things go wrong. Yeah, that was broken. The moment the statement had left the CO's mouth, I lost my Kiwi naivety, and those who commanded the regiment forfeited my trust. Yeah, fair enough. Loyalty and trust are the things that are not given lightly and should not be taken for granted. They must be earned. To receive such gifts, and they are gifts one must reciprocate. One must reciprocate them, nurture them, and never ever abuse them. As far as I was concerned, no matter who had made the decision to ignore our plea for help, it was an abuse of our loyalty and trust, and I would never allow that to happen again. Man. My mind now drifted in and out of the present as the CO answered more questions from the others. I had lost all interest in the conversation now. I just wanted to get out of the room. If I dwelled too long on the answers I had heard in my present frame of mind, it would have either reduced me to tears of frustration or into a flying rage. Man, I had castigated. Sorry, I don't know what that is. castigated castigated myself over the whole term of my imprisonment. I was certain that my incompetence was responsible for the patrol's failure and my capture. I never ever considered, even in my darkest hour, that we had been abandoned. Wow. Dinger jumped in with a question that brought me back to life. Why? CO not sending jet to check Bravo 20, passing US pilot forgot to report contact by Bravo 20. No apology by CO. Coburn sums up what went wrong. Why didn't you? Okay, so why didn't you just send a jet over our location to check us out? I could hear the edge of anger in his voice now. I never thought of that, the CO replied. What about the American pilot who we contacted by TAC B? Andy asked. He forgot to file a report on the transmission. It was 3 days later that he remembered to tell anyone, and for you, of course, that was too late. We shook our heads in amazement. Fundamental mistakes up and down the chain of command, particularly after the patrol's deployment, had sealed our fate. Excuse me. The discussion carried on for about 40 or so minutes before the colonel called a halt to the proceedings. I had to give him his due. He had not tried to pass the blame on to others, but had let any accusations fall square on his shoulders. Okay, but still, that's still a blinking dick move if that's your take and you're prepared to just let the guys sacrifice the guys. He held the highest rank in the regiment. The buck stopped there. There were no apologies made. It was simply a case of exchanging facts as they happened. However, the fact that the CO admitted mistakes had been made did not absolve him of his responsibility. Right, the colonel summed up. I intend to hold an open debrief for the regiment on what happened to Bravo 20. I expect you all to complete a comprehensive written account of what occurred to be handed in within a couple of weeks. He stood up the audience over. We shuffled out of the room in total silence, each man lost in his own thoughts, all attempting to reconcile the enormity of the CO's revelations with what we thought had gone wrong. But in light of critical matters such as the lack of Land Rovers and equipment shortages, ineffective enemy ground and weather intelligence, incorrect frequencies, rush planning, poor passage of information, poor decision making, and pure bad luck, our self-criticism had been excessive and largely inappropriate. These external factors, coupled with the contingencies of war, had combined to thwart the patrol at every turn. The regimental debrief should have been the final official chapter in the Bravo 20 story, but it did little to address the issues at hand. As it transpired, the process would take many years to complete, as every now and then a new piece of the jigsaw previously unknown or seemingly irrelevant fell into place. Some of these pieces prompted the writing of this book. Wow. Holy heck. 11. Funeral, anger, and pseudonym origin. Okay, let's have a look. It was a cold, sunny spring morning as the coffins borne by immaculately uniformed men of B Squadron 22 SAS were carried at a slow march into St. Martin's. The church was packed to overflowing, full of past and present SAS soldiers, all of whom had come to pay their final respects. A regimental belt, beret, and medals lay atop each flag-draped coffin as they slowly paraded down the aisle towards the pulpit, heads turning to watch it in solemn silence, the men present reminded of their own mortality. Eulogies were read and hymns were sung in an atmosphere that was so electrically charged with emotion that one could not but be moved. Wow. Could not but be moved by it. But it was not just an emotional outpouring of grief, for there was also a real groundswell of anger amongst those recently returned from the Gulf, a feeling that this service should not have been necessary. Once outside, the piercing cracks of the honour guards' rifles fell silent. A lone bugler began the last post, its eerie lament a final salute to those who had fallen. Standing there in the regimental cemetery, I suddenly felt very detached and alone. It could so easily have been me that the shots and bugle rang out for. Tears of pain and loss flowed freely, unashamedly, as each man passed the graves, bowed their heads, and paid their last respects. Several months after the return from Iraq, representatives from the UN arrived in Stirling Lines to see those of us who had been POWs. Their aim to take down statements on the way in which we had been treated whilst in Iraqi hands. A commission had been set up to try and recover damages from the Iraqi government, compensation for the maltreatment of both civilians and military personnel. The SAS ex-POWs were each allocated numbers for these proceedings in order to maintain our security and protect our identities. My designator was Soldier 5. Wow, okay. That's why the book title. Final resting places for Vince Phillips left and Bob Consiglio right. Steve Lance has a plaque on an adjacent wall. SAS Regimental Corner, St. Martin's Church, Hereford, stained glass dedication with SAS Battle Honours. Epilogue spans from pages 283 to 287. This is 287. All right. Epilogue. In a letter to the then commanding officer, I explained my reasons for leaving and also the way I felt about the Gulf. Time is a great healer, and over the years I had come to live with what had happened to the patrol. Though that did not mean for 1 second that it was ever forgotten, I did not regret going to war, for that was one of the very reasons I left New Zealand and joined 22 SAS, just as I did not hold the regiment itself responsible for the patrol's fate. Nevertheless, should blame need to be apportioned, one would think that those ultimately responsible would have both the character and the fortitude to stand up and be counted. Leaders up and down the chain of command make mistakes. The sign of a good leader is one who can admit this and learn from them. To date, this has certainly never happened. Bravo 20 aside, I had for the most part thoroughly enjoyed my service with the regiment, and even now sometimes still yearn for those exciting days. Wow. It's cool, heartfelt. I don't know what an epilogue is. Is that a summary? Maybe it's not a summary. I don't know. Part of the book anyway that Mike has added in here. Powerful words, and that particularly that piece around leadership and accountability, ownership. You know, people, whoever those people are, doesn't seem like they've had the courage to put their hand up and say, hey, it's my fault with the frequencies. It's my fault not communicating the information or the transmission that I received until 3 days later. yeah, just not that it would change anything, but, like it says here, leaders up and down the chain, mistakes are made. Having the fortitude to stand up and be counted is important. Anyway, 12A, why Coburn wrote this book. Holy heck, we are over an hour, but we'll keep going. 12A, why Coburn wrote this book. Criticism of McNabb's, Ryan's accounts, and issues with the MOD. I've only sent a small amount of pages in this section to keep things relevant to Bravo 20 events. Okay. By Coburn's account, the MOD/UK government tried unfairly to silence him and used dirty tactics. The bulk of this section relates to their severe legal attack on him. Okay, breaking ranks. Let's have a look. Breaking ranks. In early 1998, I made a deliberate decision that the time had come to correctly record the events that had occurred during the Bravo 20 mission. This decision came as a direct result of the books and films surrounding Bravo 20 publications that were allowed by the MOD and publications that ultimately generated much negative speculation and commentary. The latter had continued unchecked to the extent that the patrol had become so misrepresented that I and Mel, for that matter, felt that silence was no longer an option. Yeah. To make matters worse, the British MOD's no-comment stance on the UK Special Forces, UKSF, only served to fuel the controversy. Significantly, it emerged at my High Court civil trial, where the British government tried to prevent publication of Soldier 5, that the MOD had received advance copies of the manuscripts from Storm Command by General Peter de la Belliere, Bravo 20 by Andy McNabb, and The One That Got Away by Chris Ryan, all of which contain new information pertaining to Bravo 20. Alterations were made by the MOD to these books and then publication permitted, thereby allowing a selected version of the patrol story, edited by the MOD, to be released into the public domain. Man, that is crap, eh? That is such crap. The MOD's own internal memos were referred to during the court trial hearing regarding the vetting process for Soldier 5, and in particular that of Bravo 20 and The One That Got Away. For the book Bravo 20, one memo dated 2nd of August 1993 stated in part, although I see no reason why we should give this clearance priority over other more important tasks, we ought nevertheless to press ahead and try to be as helpful as possible. Okay. Upset caused by Ryan McNabb's books, films to 2 SAS members and other Bravo 20 survivors. So continuing with the breaking ranks. As for Ryan's book, The One That Got Away, a minute dated 14th June 1995 to the Armed Forces Minister and other MOD personnel stated in part, in relation to the proposed serialization of the book. In this case, there are no major problems, because the material has already appeared in one form or another in the public domain. In the course of the book, Ryan levels criticism at Vince Phillips, a patrol member who did not survive. Action will be taken to warn Mr. Phillips' family of the impending publication. Wow. The last comment made with reference to Ryan's book I found particularly galling. The MOD had recognised the offending nature of some of Ryan's commentary and the effect it would have on the Phillips family, but very little was done to prevent the impact of this criticism. Further, the failure to take effective action did not engender loyalty amongst the SAS soldiers. The High Court trial judge in this decision referred to the fact of the publication of these books and the content of them both caused great upset amongst SAS members in general and the remaining members of the Bravo 20 patrol in particular. The concern of the remaining members was that both books exaggerated the role of their authors and contained quite fictitious incidents. In particular, there was deep concern that the author of The One That Got Away blamed the compromising of the patrol on a member who later died of exposure. The defendant gave evidence that the desire to correct what he regarded as this wrongful slur on the reputation of a dead man later became one of the principal motivations for the writing of his account. The upset caused to SAS members in general and to the members of the patrol in particular was exacerbated when films of the books were released. Efforts were made by the 3 surviving members who had not written books to persuade the regiment to make some public comment. Although a public statement was... page 29, decision to write Soldier 5 was... where is it? Although a public statement was issued by the Ministry of Defence, it was regarded by the defendant as rather bland, and he felt disappointed and angry at the lack of support shown to patrol members. So I'm just reading it there because I think I've got another slide for this picture. Issued by, yeah, okay. So, as opposed to enforcing their no comment policy, the MOD, and not attempting to stop publication of these books, aided in undermining it. Such a policy may be for the best in truly confidential circumstances, but I and others class the story of Bravo 20 as the exception, given its wide public dissemination. In this instance, no comment was never the right policy, not for the families of the deceased, the surviving patrol members who maintained their silence, and most of all, not for the good of the SAS community as a whole. Yeah, so I think I was mentioning something earlier, over an hour ago now, just talking about, I suppose, maybe the negative stain it can put on the regiment. From people, I suppose, from the outside looking in. Where are we? Who maintain their silence, and most of all, not for the good of the SAS community as a whole. The decision made, I realised that in breaking my long-held silence, I would be embarking upon a route that would officially ostracise me from a community that I had given up the best part of my adult life for. However, this was a sacrifice I was prepared to make, to place the important accountability that should be made in the right context, to do right by a dead comrade and his family, something that should have occurred a long time before, and to properly correct that which had been over-exaggerated and fictionalized. My aim was to let the truth be known and allow the public to make an informed judgment with the proper facts before them. Wow. Yep. I reckon, that's probably one thing, that I've learnt over the years. A former operator in the regiment, they get a bee in their bonnet or they feel strongly about something, they're going to push hard to see that through. And this is no different. So massive respect to Mike and what he's tried to do. And it's a shame in terms of what the MOD and what other people have felt or seen fit to do, whether they've potentially made stuff up or whatever the case may be. So anyway, Coburn writes, many Tutu guys supported his efforts to write his book. All right, let's have a look. Coincidentally, both my wife and I had already been discussing leaving the UK. New Zealand or Europe were at that time the two options open to us. We felt that with the controversy surrounding me, it was impossible to continue to live in Hereford, where I bumped into regiment personnel on a daily basis. Not that the majority of them would not talk to me. Indeed, I was made aware that many supported the morality of my stand, but I felt uncomfortable at placing them in that position. After all, it was my fight, my problem, and no one else need be marked by my association. Man, a very not surprising that's a selfless thing to do, He leaving, not wanting to drag anybody else into it, but also, guys would have likely wanted to talk to him like a mate. There would have been some people that probably weren't happy about his decision to come out public with information. And so those Chinese whispers might have gone and permeated through the halls or the walls of the regimental headquarters itself. And then other people through association may have unfairly been caught up, even though they may never have been talking with Mike about anything to do with Bravo 20. Might have just been a genuine catch-up and talking about family and whatever. But they more than likely probably would have been guilty by association. So massive respect again to Mike for the decision, choosing to move away from there. He's out of the regiment now, and didn't want to drag anybody else, and probably would have made it a bit easier as well, not being in and around and bumping into people every day when you're not part of that life anymore. So that may have been part of it as well. BBC Panorama Report link. I didn't click on that link, so I haven't got any screenshots of that link. Web article, date 7 February 2002, unless these screenshots are that link. BBC says Bravo 20 call for help deliberately ignored. It's saying here BBC, I don't know. Seems like BBC is a bit like the ABC in Australia, airing BS constantly. BBC, I haven't got an acronym for that. But I don't know. Seems like they don't have a very good reputation when it comes to talking about the UK Special Forces over their ways as well. So anyway, let's have a look. The official inquiry into what went wrong has always maintained that no comprehensible messages for help were ever received. Famous mission, but Panorama has seen an SAS log recording calls for assistance from the patrol, which it says shows emergency requests were received, ignored, and covered up. It's interesting. Mal/Coburn critical of SAS leadership. Calls logged. Let's have a look. Calls logged. The soldier known as. Okay. The soldier known as Mal speaks openly to the program without a disguise or mask about his sense of betrayal. I felt betrayed by the regimental hierarchy, not all of them, but really by the commanding officer and the operations officer. Mal claims the Bravo 20 patrol was considered expendable by SAS commanders once it got into trouble. Mal's patrol colleague Mike Coburn, who has only recently been able to publish his account of the mission after a court in New Zealand lifted an injunction, was tortured by Iraqi guards during his 48 days as a prisoner. Well, he said he was disgusted that the regiment's hierarchy let a lot of the guys down. The first entry in the logs quoted by the program for 24th January 1991 refers to a request for exfiltration ASAP, or ASAP, ASP, but suggests it was unclear whether contact had been made. Entries for 25 and 26 of January refer to two further requests as a belated rescue foiled by bad weather. Coburn Soldier 5 on BBC report. Let's have a look at this. As 2002 progressed, further fuel was added to the fire from an unexpected quarter following the large public interest generated by the High Court trial. BBC Panorama producers had approached both Mal and myself regarding running an expose on Bravo 20 with a view to highlighting the intrigue and incongruities that surrounded the story. As the BBC began to delve beneath the surface in what proved to be a remarkable feat of journalism, bizarre and apparently contradicting facts came to light. So much so that the slant of the program changed from one looking to tell the true story to another looking to reveal an apparent betrayal. Panorama uncovered the transcript from the Bravo 20 patrol logs, something that would normally have been classified secret. That transcript extracts of which were eventually publicly televised, proved beyond doubt that the SAS hierarchy had received the patrol's calls for help, but had chosen to ignore them. Wow. Far out. Oh. This proof was something that I and the other patrol members had long suspected, but until that disclosure had never really been absolutely certain of. As the SAS officers in charge at the time had claimed our transmissions came through corrupted and unintelligible. The MOD's comment regarding the release of the log transcript by Panorama was simply that they appear to be authentic. Another revelation that would normally have been lost, given that the Gulf conflict had been confined to the history books, was that one of the conditions agreed to by the Special Forces hierarchy in discussions with General Schwarzkopf prior to the Special Forces being given the green light to deploy was that the SAS/SBS were on their own, a point the British military decided not to share with its men. This fact went some way to explain the reluctance of the SAS command to ask for US support when it was most desperately needed. Wow. Leadership, eh? Poor, it sounds like no other way to describe it, just sounds like poor leadership from the CEO's perspective. The lack of transparency, not having the courage to look after his men and to sit there and speak with them when they come back, and having champagne and toasting there and saying that they're not going to be court-martialed. And in the same breath saying that he'd lose a patrol versus a scud. Just crazy. Anyway, not only had these facts been never previously disclosed, they were also made all the more unpalatable by the realization that the patrol had been misled from the outset of the mission's inception, particularly regarding assistance on the ground, should we need it. This most certainly added weight to the view that the patrol was expendable. The MOD refused to comment in any substantial way to the Panorama production, neither offering a countervailing view, nor incredibly, given their unrelenting battle to suppress my publishing efforts, trying to prevent its release. Perhaps they were getting a little exhausted by this time. It was in the end left to the former RSM of the SAS, Peter Ratcliffe, to provide the quasi-official response to questions put forward by the Panorama team. He was allowed to publish his SAS book, which hit the shelves 4 days before my trial started. Wow, far out. This is crazy. He was not a contract signer. He was not a contract signer, but was serving in the SAS when the contracts were introduced in 1996. The fact he did not have to sign the contract was never satisfactorily explained by the MOD witnesses at the trial. The Panorama program showed that his view, while reflecting the establishment position, did not cover the full story. And so February 2003 saw the final act in this long-standing legal battle play itself out, the wheel having turned full circle. We found, did it carry on? We found, out. Another BBC report, BBC view for why Bravo 20 call for help ignored and proof they were ignored. Not. And it's got A, went on this web article and found the link below. B, screenshots of the above article Bravo 20 events. Okay, Wednesday 23rd of January. Let's have a look. As dawn broke, the patrol realised they were in serious trouble. They'd been dropped too close to an enemy position. The mission was in jeopardy. They sent an urgent call for help on the radio, but they'd been given the wrong frequency. Thursday, 24th of January, on the second full day of the mission, things went from bad to worse. The enemy may not have seen them, but someone else did. Now they were compromised by a goat herder, a kid who was wandering around the area, and there were many of them around the area with their herds. Lex got on satellite communication system and tried. It was really extraordinary that we could not communicate by that means either. The message went out, compromised, request immediate extraction, and we were not aware of that message being received either. Wow. Bravo 20 calls for help ignored. Film, let's have a look. Film 1995, Brigadier Andrew Massey, Gulf Commander, UK Special Forces. We first heard that Bravo 20 was in trouble when we got a garbled radio message. We really didn't know what had gone wrong. We had to interpret it. Peter Taylor, however, we understood that SAS intelligence officers at UK headquarters near High Wycombe did hear Bravo 20 calling for help on the satellite link several times. They also overheard a conversation between Brigadier Massey and the SAS colonel, who was the patrol's commanding officer in the Gulf. They were discussing possible air support for a rescue. Massey, we understand, described such military backup as a bit premature, to the astonishment of some of those at High Wycombe, who had no doubt the patrol was in serious trouble. What they may not have known was that mounting a rescue was potentially embarrassing. Far out. Massey, we had to look after ourselves. General de la Belliere stressed this, and General Schwarzkopf stressed that again. But he winked as he said it, and I knew he'd give us help if we needed it. There we go. Taylor, the SAS hierarchy was confident that Bravo 20 could look after itself, and if they ran into trouble, there were clearly agreed procedures to get them out. They'd be rescued. This hallowed contract was the lifeline between the men exposed in the field and their officers back at base. Wow. Waiting for helicopter extraction that never came. Taylor, besides radio and satellite communications, the patrol had a handset known as a TAC-B, a tactical beacon. It could send a distress signal to passing aircraft. Mal, I was aware of Andy McNabb actually on the TAC-B calling the turbo into a turbo call. Let's read that again. Andy McNabb actually on the TAC-B calling the turbo into a turbo call sign. That was British Special Forces to anyone who's receiving that call sign or Allied aircraft, or so we hoped. He didn't get any response. Taylor, however, we can reveal that some messages were received back at base, and we know that they said, and we know what they said because we've seen a copy of an SAS daily record or log written up in the Gulf. And we can further reveal from the log that the first message was received on Thursday 24th of Jan, the second full day of the mission, and it was quite clear B Squadron Northern MSR Group, that's Bravo 20's reported that they had been compromised and requested exfiltration as soon as possible. Wow. There was no ambiguity about the message. The patrol was in deep trouble. Nevertheless, no rescue was launched, although the patrol had received no confirmation of their messages. They hoped that one or two might have got through. Having survived the firefight and evaded the enemy, they headed for a previously agreed rendezvous point, expecting a rescue helicopter. Mal, we waited something like, I think, half an hour there, so well past the time. There's no sign of this helicopter, and then we have to move. Far out, man. Mistake by Bravo 20 patrol splitting. Let's have a look. Taylor, their voices and the message seemed lost in the wind. McNabb suddenly realised that in the appalling conditions, the patrol had split. Mal, SAS member Bravo 20, bear in mind it was a very, very dark night, as black as ink. There was very little ambient light. Sometime during the night, when everyone was tired, rarely the separation occurred. It's not easy to have to admit that publicly, but, you know, it's a fact that mistakes occur. That was a mistake, and that we didn't intend to split as a group of 3, of which I was a part, up front, and then as a group of 5. Wow. Mal, critical, helicopter not sent. XRSM Ratcliffe defends SAS leadership decision. Okay. Taylor, once more, the log we've seen indicates that a second message was received. It said Bravo 20 made TAC B contact again. It was reasonable to assume that they were moving south. A Chinook 47 rescue crew were on standby, but the Chinook didn't fly. Mel, why didn't that helicopter come in when it should have? Not only in terms of their standard procedures, because we had no effective communications, but secondly, because they did actually receive some slightly corrupted versions of messages, even more so to the effect that imminent compromise request extraction and then compromised request immediate extraction. Taylor, why not send in the helicopter? Peter Ratcliffe, SAS Regimental Sergeant Major Gulf War. It's going to be risking the lives of all these men and a helicopter. Far out. That's the whole point of having your extraction and your RV procedures and having a QRF. Like, you ask those pilots in the QRF if they want to go in and extract people that are calling for help, that are compromised. And I would be surprised if any pilot or crewman or QRF member said, no, I don't want to, because we might end up going down with them. That's why you're on QRF. That's why there's emergency procedures. That seems nuts. That's what the Regimental Sergeant Major of the SAS is saying. It's going to be risking the lives of all these men in a helicopter. You're risking multiple lives anyway. What the hell are you on about? Taylor, but you've got the lives of 8 men at stake at the other end. Ratcliffe, this is the price you pay sometimes. Wow. Wow. I wonder how the CO and the RSM would feel if they were in that patrol on the other end calling for the help. That's crazy, man. That's crazy, Ratcliffe. If that's what you said, like, I'm just going off what I'm reading here. Jeez. Mal, now, if that kind of information has been coming in, we're in serious trouble. We need rescuing. That was the gist of the message, and there's no doubt they would have understood that. Taylor, that's why they feel betrayed. Ratcliffe, they weren't betrayed. How can you say they weren't betrayed? The Ratcliffe, that is, Taylor, they feel abandoned. Ratcliffe, they weren't abandoned either. Holy heck, Taylor, the helicopter wasn't there. Ratcliffe, the helicopter wasn't there because of these messages that was being received, which were garbled. No, they weren't garbled, mate. You just said it would have been risking the helicopter and the crew. You were getting the messages. You'd heard what was being said. Oh, far out. There's no ownership there in that piece. If this is the conversation and if that's what happened, there's no accountability or ownership there, mate. Near mutiny by 2 SAS guys when told there'd be no rescue for Bravo 20. Taylor. Meanwhile, back at base, other members of the squadron couldn't wait to get airborne to rescue the patrol. So like I said, you ask anybody on QRF or anybody in that regiment that would have been back there, any pilot, they would have gladly, I think anyway, they would have gladly put up their hand and said, let's go get them. One told me there was absolute desperation and near mutiny. Their commanding officer came under intense pressure to respond. So Coburn Soldier 5 book, page 77 on the near mutiny. Let's have a look. All right, day 3. Get this thing wound up, Harry said, pouncing on the unsuspecting RAF flying officer. We've got a patrol in the ship and in need of immediate exfil. The B Squadron lads came over in a rush, strapping on their belt orders and cocking weapons on the trot. At the same moment, an SAS officer appeared looking none too pleased. What do you think you're doing? That chopper is going nowhere. All movement ceased and the men turned to look at the officer. What the F is that supposed to mean? Harry retorted, giving the man such a stare that he was forced to take a step backward. You can't just go flying off across the border like that. Deconfliction has to be sorted out. Route submitted to HQ. What's more? What's more, there's an S60 battery right on top of their position. I will not subject an airframe and aircrew to that type of known risk. 20's ERV is 10 clicks south of that position. That's a load of bollocks, Harry countered. Listen, you lot, you are all ordered to stand down. The situation is in hand. We will get someone out to them. The Chinook pilot kept his distance, not wanting to be part of the standoff. If 6 heavily armed SAS soldiers told him to fly into Iraq to get their mates, he most certainly wasn't going to argue with them. The SAS officer was the one paid to do that. We are monitoring the situation carefully. They've got plenty of rations, comms and ammo. Let's all just calm down and let 20 report and give us more information. Then we can organise something rationally. Man, you've just heard request immediate extraction. This, nuts, man. The impasse lasted for another 30 seconds or so before Harry finally spoke up. Stand down, lads. It was the hardest thing he had ever had to say in his life. The malice in the soldiers' eyes burned bright as they backed down. They were, after all, in the army, and orders were orders, whether you agreed with them or not. What a load of piss. The grumbling continued all the way back to the lines. I can only imagine. How would guys in the Australian SAS react? Oh, I think they'd just be the same, you know. But in all honesty, I think they'd be the same. They'd tool up, be ready to go in. If you've got an officer, the CEO, coming in and yelling at you and then telling you to stand down, yeah, there'd be some sort of clash. But they'd probably follow orders and do the same thing. To be honest, that's my take. And then again, you know, there may be different circumstances. There may be more of a conversation or more of a heated debate, I should say. What is happening? You know, the patrol getting ready to go in. What are you doing? What information have you got? What have they said? What have their comms said? The comms that we've heard is that they need immediate extraction, exfil, and they need it now. So why are we sitting around here? Have you heard something different to that? And maybe if the CEO couldn't provide adequate answers to that from that perspective, or no, that's all we've heard, and they're still sitting around twiddling their thumbs, monitoring the situation, maybe guys in the regiment, maybe even still in 2-2 or anywhere, might go, yeah, nah, up yours, we need to go in now before things turn to crap or before they die or whatever. Maybe, but who knows? They'd probably follow the orders at the end of the day for the most part. BBC theory for why rescue is not given. Let's have a look at this. So why did nothing happen when at least 2 of the distress signals got through? The key may lie in the assurance that General de la Belliere gave General Schwarzkopf when he promised that if a patrol got into trouble, the SAS could look after itself. Perhaps the regimental hierarchy felt that they would have been losing face had they asked the Americans for help so early in the mission. It's possible that the garbled messages may have served as a convenient excuse. Filmed in 1995, General Sir Peter de la Belliere, Commander, British Forces, Gulf War, I'd promised Schwarzkopf that if the SAS went in, they wouldn't need rescuing. Well, that's just stupid, eh? Like, who are you to make that promise? Are you going in behind the lines? So if you're not, you shouldn't be making those sort of promises, mate. Now, if the SAS and I thought was confident they'd sort their own act out. If the SA suddenly did start to need rescuing, then what I'd said to Norman Schwarzkopf was inaccurate and I'd got to do something about it. Well, no crap, Sherlock. Mal saying CL22 SA said Bravo 20 were expendable. Let's have a look. XRSM Ratcliffe disagrees. Taylor, did you ask? All right. Taylor, did you ask the commanding officer when you met him back at Hereford why the rescue mission had not been launched? Mal, I didn't personally ask him that, but that question was asked. Taylor, and he said, Mal, this I remember clear as day, as well, and it is damning stuff, really. He said, in effect, that he was prepared to risk a squadron of the SAS for a Scud missile, and that we were, in effect, expendable. Taylor, expendable? Mao, expendable. Taylor, the commanding officer, is alleged to have said the patrol was expendable. Peter Ratcliffe, SAS Regimental Sergeant Major Gulf War. No. I've known the commanding officer for a number of years, and he is not a man to expend anybody's lives. Well, yeah, your RSM is going to back your CO more than likely. But even then, this is Ratcliffe's take and perspective of the CO. The disappointing thing, though, is that he wasn't in the room when the CO met with the survivors and had this champagne. And where was the RSM? So anyway, he cared about his men, and he still cares about men, and he would have done everything in his power to make sure that those guys got out alive. Well, you didn't let that QRF team go. But at the same time, he would not risk other people's lives when he was unclear of the situation that was taking place in Iraq. Yeah, potentially convenient, but when you've got a couple of transmissions that are saying you need immediate exfil, seems pretty clear that they need help. Mel, that information, if he had said that or admitted that, should I say, to the regiment, if it had got out of that room, that would have changed the character of the regiment. People going straight up to him and poking him in the chest, going, what on earth are you talking about? Because rather like the safety net which surrounded our patrol, or we thought did, we needed to know that safety was in place. Yeah. Taylor, because that helicopter wasn't sent in soon, 3 men died. 3 members of Bravo 20 never returned. Ratcliffe, 3 men did die, but you cannot send a helicopter unless you have got absolute clarity from the guys on the ground. I don't know about that. Perfect world, you'd love to have absolute clarity, but I don't know that you can ever have absolute clarity all the time with regards to stuff that's happening on the ground. There's always going to be some uncertainty, so that doesn't seem right. Anyway, J, Mel/Coburn anger. Let's have a look. Taylor, what angers Mel and Mike most is the breach of contract they believe left their patrol abandoned and 3 comrades dead. To them, those who dare only win if the system is there to support them. Yeah, that's a true part. Like that system of the SAS, the structure, the support is a large part of what makes Who Dares Wins possible. Mel, if we thought we were put in a patrol here, we'll be part of it. And in fact, we could well be expendable. I, for one, would not be part of the regiment. So Mel saying, if we thought we were put in a patrol here, we'll be part of it. And in fact, we could well be expendable. I, for one, would not be a part of the regiment. Yeah, I don't think anybody goes into the regiment expecting that they're expendable. But you ask any operator, this is just my take, I think you ask any operator, they'll say they're willing to risk it all and give it all for the job, for the mission. But that's not why you're not going in there thinking that the structure and the regiment, the support wrapped around you is just going to leave you to go and be expendable, if that makes sense. So, yeah, otherwise I don't think you'll have people that want to join up to something that would sit and say, Who Dares Wins, you're on your own. If you get in the crap, like, we're not coming to get you because we don't want to risk anyone else. So essentially you're expendable to us. But, come and join us. I don't think you'd get anybody putting their hand up. And I don't think that's how the regiment operates. But in this case, in this example, it's hard to argue with what's been said. And how much of it is true, how much of it is false, I don't know. We asked the Ministry of Defence to answer the questions raised by Panorama. They declined. And that's it. That's all the slides for the person that sent through the request for this reaction. Hopefully I covered off on everything that you sent through, Bo. You sent a heck of a lot of screenshots, so I appreciate you taking the time to screenshot all of those from the different books. What was it? Peter Ratcliffe's book, Chris Ryan's book, and Soldier 5. I don't think you showed anything in here from Bravo 20. Or if you did, I wouldn't know anyway. But at least 3 books you've provided information on, and then some other, whatever these are, the Panorama Wiki comments or transcripts, for want of a better term. But man, there's a lot in there. I've tried to give my thoughts and take as I've gone through. Other parts I've just read it as per and then briefly given a take. But at the end of the day, hopefully, like I've said at the start and in the introduction, I have nothing but respect for the regiment, Like 2-2, the founding fathers of the SAS, the Australians, the Kiwis, having had the privilege to serve in the Australian regiment, having a good understanding of some of the guys in the New Zealand unit and guys in the Australian unit, and a handful of guys from 2-2, having a bit of an understanding of what they're like and just the type of types of men that they are, good men. Each have their own quirks and different personalities, but just good men. And those units themselves are good as well. Can't speak to the Bravo 20 patrol. I wasn't there, wasn't part of these conversations. It's sad that this stuff has happened, and it's sad that people like Mike have felt the need to, try and do something about it, to try to put forward what the realities are from his perspective and what he experienced. And I suppose likewise with the others, with Mr. Ratcliffe, with Chris Ryan, with Andy McNabb. How much is true, how much is made up or fiction, I don't know. Only those that wrote their books know. Soldier 5 seems like a very interesting, hard-hitting recount of the version of events that he experienced, what he witnessed, what he saw, what he went through. And I don't know that he has anything in particular to gain. No royalties going to him from what I can tell. And he's just trying to set the record straight, in the hopes, I suppose, that maybe one day somebody might have the courage to put their hand up and go, actually, yeah, I stuffed up. The CEO seems like he has a bit to answer for as I read through this, or as I've read through those bits and pieces of information, as well as the RSM. Does the buck stop with them? Probably not. Patrol commander, did those conversations happen in and around taking a vehicle? Did those conversations happen in and around reducing kits? The frequencies, how did that happen? Being given the wrong frequencies. Just the E&E plan, all of that sort of stuff. Who are those people that had responsibility and ownership for that task and didn't deliver on the task the way that they were supposed to? There's got to be some accountability there somewhere, I would imagine. But if you stuck around this long, that's my take, for what it's worth, my 2 cents, my not based on experience reaction to what I've read, just the stuff that's been provided here by one of the kind supporters of the channel. So thank you again to that person that sent through all these screenshots for your time once again, and to anybody that spent any time here listening to me ramble on. As always, that being said, the message is the same, regardless of any challenges, trials, difficulties that you may be going through or facing. All I can say and all I can do is encourage you to keep turning up, keep staying in the fight, keep putting one foot in front of the other, and take one day at a time. Know and trust that things can do and will get better if you want them to, and that the sun will shine again, and that those better days are always closer than you and I think. There is a light at the end of that tunnel. So just stick at it, man. Keep fighting, keep chipping away. As always, go always a little further. Remember, who dares wins and who cares wins. And until the next video, there's a big mana wave coming from me to you, filled with my aroha, respect, appreciation, and gratitude for you all. Much respect to those still serving as well, those that have served, those that are still serving, and those that will look to serve going forward, whether you look to join in the SF space or just military or first responders in general. Thank you all very much.